A dried fish seller built the empire that now controls 20% of South Korea's economy. It all started with about $8,500 in 1938 money, roughly 30,000 Korean yen at the time. The $25 figure floating around online is a myth, born from mistakenly applying the modern exchange rate to 1938 currency. Welcome to Plexo. March 1, 1938. A modest wooden warehouse in the city of Daegu. Lee Byung-chul packed dried fish and noodles to ship to China. Outside, dirt roads showed the backwardness of a rural peninsula. No tech factories. No skyscrapers. Just sacks of flour and the smell of saltpeter. 15 years later, in 1953, things got drastically worse. The Korean War ended, leaving the country reduced to ashes. Per capita income was barely $67 a year. South Korea was poorer than most of Africa. The capital, Seoul, was a maze of collapsed buildings. The government depended entirely on foreign aid to feed its people. The future didn't exist. In this desolate scene, survival dictated the rules. The daily image on the outskirts of the capital was grim. Mountains of American military scrap metal piled up next to muddy rivers, where citizens pulled out burnt copper wire to survive. From those smoking ruins, an unexpected alliance was born. The government needed to rebuild roads, bridges, and power grids at record speed. Small merchants, like that fish seller from Daegu, had the ambition to execute the projects. The state began handing out exclusive contracts to a select group of businessmen. That's how the seed of a historic economic model was planted, one that would condemn millions to work for a handful of families. May 16, 1961. General Park Chung-hee seized power in a coup. Park was a short man with a cold stare behind dark glasses and an always immaculate military uniform. He had one clear obsession: industrialize South Korea at any cost. His first move was a power play of absolute authority. He ordered the arrest of the country's richest businessmen on corruption charges. The scene was humiliating and calculated. The public watched those millionaires parade through Seoul streets, with wooden signs around their necks that bluntly declared them corrupt pigs. But Park didn't want to destroy them. He wanted to control them. He gathered them in a room and offered a non-negotiable deal. The government would drop the criminal charges and give them loans at near-zero interest rates. In exchange, they had to build heavy industries, shipyards, and steel plants as the state dictated. The businessmen agreed immediately. That's how the Chaebols, the giant family-run conglomerates, were born. The pact forged corporations like Hyundai, LG, and Samsung. The state planned. The families executed. If a company met its export quotas, it got more public money. If it failed, the government cut off credit and let it go bankrupt. The work pace was brutal and militarized. Workers slept in factories to avoid losing production time. South Korea went from exporting wigs and squid to building the world's largest ships in less than a decade. The fact nobody mentions: the fastest economic growth of the 20th century was financed by starvation wages and unions banned by decree. February 1968. The mountains separating Seoul from the port city of Busan were an impassable wall of rock. President Park demanded a 266-mile highway connecting the two cities. International engineers said the project would take at least 10 years. Chung-hee, the founder of Hyundai, promised to finish it in 2.5 years. To meet this impossible deadline, construction never stopped. The image at the work sites defied logic: barrels of asphalt burning in the January snow, while thousands of workers paved the frozen ground under the headlights of military trucks. They worked 16-hour shifts. The Gyeongbu Expressway opened on July 7, 1970, exactly on the imposed deadline. This colossal project proved the execution capability of the Chaebols, and the state doubled down. During the 1970s, the government ordered conglomerates to abandon light industry and invest massively in chemicals, steel, and automobiles. State banks funneled billions of dollars to these families. The entire country bore the risk. The profits stayed with the business clans. The economy grew at 9% annually. Skyscrapers began replacing wooden shacks in Seoul. The world watched in awe as an agrarian, devastated nation transformed into an industrial powerhouse. But this massive injection of cheap debt built more than factories. It created a financial system structurally addicted to easy credit, with no real oversight, and a bill that the entire country would eventually pay. July 1997. The illusion of infinite prosperity crashed into a wall of financial reality. The Asian financial crisis hit South Korea with devastating force. For decades, the Chaebols had taken massive dollar loans to expand worldwide, convinced the government would never let them fail. Daewoo, the country's second-largest conglomerate, had debts exceeding $70 billion. When foreign investors panicked and pulled their capital, the South Korean won collapsed. The central bank's reserves dried up in weeks. The country was technically bankrupt. In December 1997, the government signed the largest financial bailout in history up to that point. The International Monetary Fund injected $21 billion directly, as part of a total international package of $58.4 billion that included funds from the World Bank, the Asian Development Bank, and several allied countries. The conditions were draconian. 14 of the top 30 Chaebols went bankrupt. Hundreds of thousands of workers lost their jobs overnight. The citizens' response was an act of patriotism unprecedented in modern history. In January 1998, a national campaign erupted to save the country. The scene on the streets was surreal and moving, mile-long lines of citizens in the winter cold, handing over wedding rings, sports trophies, and family medals in simple cardboard boxes on folding tables. Nearly 3.5 million people donated 227 metric tons of gold to the state. The metal was melted into bars and sent abroad to pay the national debt. An entire nation mortgaged its memories to rescue a system that had never included them. The sacrifice of its citizens saved the nation, but the IMF bailout rewrote the rules of power. The weakest companies vanished. The survivors, led by Samsung, Hyundai, and SK, emerged stronger and more dominant than ever. The state demanded reforms and greater transparency, but the Chaebols were already too big to control. They had become untouchable global corporations. Today, South Korea is the world's 14th largest economy. Samsung alone accounts for nearly one-fifth of the country's GDP. Citizens are born in Samsung hospitals, study at Samsung universities, buy Samsung apartments, and use Samsung phones. This extreme concentration of wealth created a web of dark influence at the highest levels of power. The symbiosis between politicians and corporations culminated in monumental scandals. The image that defined this era came in 2017. The whole world watched a South Korean president, impeached, handcuffed, wearing a prison uniform with a number on her chest, escorted to court for accepting bribes from business families. The conglomerate heirs also went to jail, but they were quickly pardoned on the grounds that the national economy needed them free to keep running. The Korean miracle was forged on blood, sweat, and an unbreakable pact between the government and a few families. The country escaped absolute poverty thanks to this relentless model. South Korea turned obedience into such an effective industrial weapon that today its biggest threat isn't foreign competition, it's the total victory of its own corporate masters.